All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And a big shout out to Marla, who in her first year literally has transformed transformation into Accelerate. And MDC enthusiastically supports the new positioning of creativity, commerce, and culture. And we're particularly honored to be anchoring one of the three pillars of the new positioning, talent. In fact, our slogan is the place where great talent lives, and we have invested dramatically in preserving and maintaining a culture of creativity. And I'm honored to be joined by three of our towering executives. You've heard their names, sort of. The pictures are on the board. And diversity being very important to MDC, we're bringing a form of diversity today. I'll call it geographic diversity, because we have Evin from Los Angeles, and Silla from Gothenburg and Stockholm, and Karina from London. So truly a global audience, a global session. Topic is inside agency culture, and it reminds me of the quote often attributed to Peter Drucker, that culture eats strategy for lunch. So let's try to break it down. I want to start with some of the structural components of the agencies that are conducive to creating and maintaining the culture of creativity. And I'm going to start with one of the newest members of the MDC family, Silla from Forsman and Bodenfors. Everyone is well aware of Jean-Claude Van Damme and the famous epic split on behalf of Volvo Trucks. But what really attracted us to F&B was the unique and flat culture that you have over the course of 30 years cultivated. Why don't you tell the group today a little bit about how you've maintained that, preserved it, and what it does for creativity?
Yeah. We very often talk about being human when we talk about our culture and structure. And when we talk about that, we actually mean helping each other. So except from being an incredibly flat organization, helping each other is a huge part of our business model. And when we founded the agency many, many years ago, we realized that we weren't, as individuals, the smartest people in the world, or not even the smartest people in Sweden. But we were smart enough to realize that. So we realized that by collaborating, we got really smart together. And we often say that by collaboration, we make people run at 125% of their capacity. So with this simple insight, it kind of dictates how we work. And we think that the people that are closest to the task are the ones that are best fit to come up with the solutions. And each client has a really small and dedicated group of people, let's say 4 to 6 people, that has the full responsible for come up with all the ideas and for the work to be done. And they also have the financial responsible. So that means that we have no hierarchies, no layers. There's no one there to kind of sign off the work. And we often say that there is only one boss, and that is the task itself. But of course, all these teams doesn't work in a vacuum. They need to get help from each other. So everyone, it's everyone's responsible to bring up what they are working on and show each other, to test the ideas and to get feedback on how to improve the work. So I would say like the thing or the art of collaboration is what makes our model special.
Great. Evan, 72 and Sunny often talks about being one company with 5 doors as you think about your global footprint. How has that concept fostered a culture of creativity?
Well, it helps that when we started, we opened Los Angeles and Amsterdam on the same day. Now, technically, we were 5 people, and we'd go between each office, but that was crucial to how we started from the beginning, and a big part of that was our values. We decided early on the reason we exist, the type of people we want to attract, are all rooted in who our values are, one of which is a learning orientation, open to what's to come, not looking back with an expert stance. And so those values carry over into the types of leaders we hire. And we ask ourselves repeatedly, if I was running an office, what would I want? So we give a lot of autonomy to all of those offices and all of those office leaders to be creative entrepreneurs, which is incredibly important, and it makes their voices heard, so they feel like they're part of the team and a part of the bigger 72 and sunny future. We're big believers that a success of one office makes all tides rise, and that works when everyone's voice is heard and a part of the process. And the third piece would be human connection. To build on what Silla said, I think you're going to hear this probably time and time again from the three of us, but we foster connection repeatedly between all of our leaders. We're believers that the more they talk, the easier those hard conversations are when they come up. We've had offices say the best thing for this brand is to move it to a different office. Even though that might affect that person's compensation, they know it's better for the full company. And that's because they believe in each other, they trust each other, and they all come from the same values. Each office has its own personality, each office has its own culture, its own process, but it's rooted in the same values, ultimately, which helps us grow and evolve and keeps pushing each other and learning from each other.
So Karina, Anomaly is famous for talking about having no silos. How does that aid and abet the evolution of a culture of creativity?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we were born in an age of great change. And I think in order to be successful, when we set up the company 14 years ago, we really did look to build a new model that was better placed to answer business questions in the round for a changed world. And what we looked at, and we literally just took aim at a lot of the legacy thinking and the status quo and a lot of the siloed thinking that existed, and quite frankly still exists within the industry. And I think we've been successful in developing a more progressive model and culture in a similar way, to what Evin talked about, because we are a values-based company. We are super clear about who we are and what we're trying to do. And that really guides all of everything that we do. So we think silos are bad, right, by their very nature. Silos ultimately breed very single-minded thinking at a time when obviously you need diversity of thought, you need multiplicity of ideas. So all we do constantly is remove any barrier that gets in the way of greater collaboration, echoing the theme, and people coming together. So right from the get-go, we kind of blew up the traditional sort of power base that tends to exist within an agency. I think if you think about most agencies, they have been built on a particular discipline or department or role or even person. For the sake of example, let's call that the ECD, right? I mean, in general terms, it's an hourglass model where everyone is running around to kind of make that decision around the ECD's approval. And our model is very, very different. We have a hub and spoke model where the business question is in the middle, and then we have this intense focus around it, around the hub of diversity of skills.
So in each case, where you're taking what was a traditional hierarchical model, although in the case of F&B, I'm not sure it ever really existed, but breaking down the barriers, breaking down the walls, breaking down the silos, creating these wonderful cultures, riffing off of what the founders of each of your agencies probably sat around and thought about when they wanted to build something different. It all sounds great, but we've all been in that client meeting where you have to move the needle, or I'm in a board meeting and we've got to move the performance of the company. So in this age of increasing accountability, how does the culture manifest itself in being not just good for the esprit de corps of your colleagues, but for the business itself? It's a jump ball. I'll throw it to any of the three of you. Who goes first?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of accountability, we love accountability, right? We're a company that has a very entrepreneurial kind of mindset. We train a commercial muscle within the company, and therefore we like to be held accountable, right? We never ever charge based on time or output or kind of input base. We always charge on sort of what we talk about as value-based compensation, right? So that is being held accountable for the value of the work, the value of the team, the value of the performance, and so accountable for, of course, the creativity, but the business impact.
Yeah, I think to build on Karina, if you're not focused on what the core problem is, it can become a distraction. But if you are focused on what's the problem we're trying to solve, all the noise goes away. One of the things we found is you add all these new disciplines, and in choosing to embrace, we say high five change. It's going to happen anyway. You can choose to be scared of it, or you can high five it. Usually makes it a little easier to take on. It's still a big challenge. But a big part of it is being really clear who are the deciders, who are the influencers. I think that's been a common theme throughout the discussion this morning. But as more people get involved and you want to shrink the team and you want to be super clear, we make it a point before meetings, what phase you're in on a project, what phase you're on a client, whether that's globally, within an office, within a brand team, who's the decider and who are the influencers. Once you do that, it frees people up in a lot of ways. The agreement is if you're an influencer, you agree to get on board with whatever the decider decides. And if you're the decider, you agree to listen openly to the influencers. But it releases stress from people of being uncertain and makes you a lot more efficient in those conversations. And again, helps kind of drown out the noise that is prone to change.
Yeah, and I just agree on what you two say, because I think that working with this small team structure that we have, that really makes everyone accountable in the office.
Yeah.
All right, so we talk about culture because of the impact that it has on clearly the #1 cost center in all of our businesses, and that's people. And we are, without question, a people business. We are in the business of ideas. And so let's move from the theoretical to the practical and share with the group this morning some of the initiatives that you've all put in place that have had the most impact on your teams. Evin, why don't we start with you? You've got some interesting new programs around parental leave and returnship that makes 72 and Sunny such a warm and cozy place to work.
Thank you. Well, when we set out our mission a few years ago to expand and diversify the creative class as a global mission, that became our filter for policies, for partnerships, for where we put funding as a company and where we look at innovation in our company. And that goes to high school partnerships to create more awareness to students in particular in under-resourced areas to make sure they're aware of these careers. And then to our internal programs, our parental leave, looking hard at what happens to women in the creative leadership roles, where's the drop-off. We realized very quickly we need a better primary caretaker leave policy, which is now 6 months. We looked at external partnerships within the industry and beyond, so things like the 3% certification. It's a scary process, but we were open to external feedback to make sure that we were doing all we could to really foster that growth. Internally, a program like the monthly high five, where we take our diverse creatives and give them access to our most senior leaders, which is oftentimes the people that they came to work for. They did the work they're inspired by, but they might not have access to on a regular basis. So let's give them regular access to help accelerate their growth, because it's not just a recruitment game, it's also a retention game. How is our culture going to change and evolve? And a big part of that is having leaders who look like America and who we want to be, or look like a diverse Europe, or look like a diverse Sydney and Singapore. And then external initiatives that exist. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. Free the Bid came apart, and we're big believers in progress over perfection. If you don't jump in and join it, we're not going to see progress. So Free the Bid, I think most people are aware of, is an initiative where you commit to, if you're required to triple bid, at least one of those directors will be female. And we've seen amazing results from that. And these women are winning the jobs not because they're women. Once they're in their bidding, they're winning because they're the best candidates. They've got the best treatments, they've got the best approach, and our teams feel like they're going to make the best films.
Not to play the age card, but when I broke into this business 4 decades ago, there were training programs, and these were massive undertakings by the agencies. As an early assistant brand manager at Lever Brothers, I got to sit through weeks-long training, and it just isn't economically viable anymore. But one of the things that impressed me most about Anomaly is you've set up almost like an in-house studio, and the founders and the senior leadership team I think, transmits a lot of culture through that venue. Talk a little bit about how you've institutionalized that kind of internal learning.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's critical, right, to invest in your talent. And Anomaly is a very unique company, and that's not something that just exists on a chart or PR nonsense, right? So because of that, we have to be, we have to make sure that we are setting up our talent for success and helping them navigate why we're different and how we're different. So we really do obsess about the DNA of Anomaly. And so we set up a talent development platform and studio called DNA. And literally what that is designed to do is, ensure that everyone really, really understands what we're doing together, the values of the company, how we work. But also, importantly, avoid the kind of the gravitational pull of mediocrity, right? If you look around and you can see it, everybody knows that as you scale, it is harder and harder to retain the DNA of the company and to ensure that that sort of middle-age spread doesn't set in as you scale. So we are super paranoid about that and obsess about it, and therefore make sure that people really understand things like, why do we do IP, right? Why do we create our own ventures as well as our client work? What does that really mean to be entrepreneurial? And some of those values and sort of just codifying how we work together is all important.
Silla, I have this picture of a first-year recruit at Forsman looking at the wall, along with dozens of other colleagues critiquing the output of a 20-year veteran, and just thinking about what that does to the dynamic of the culture inside of F&B. When you talk about a flat organization, I mean, it really is flat.
It's extremely flat. And that means that you need to let go of prestige. Everyone needs to do that. And as I said before, well, we all have committed that the only boss is the task.
Yeah.
Everyone's free to speak up their mind. And also when we have this collaborative way of working, everyone is aiming for that result instead of aiming for what someone else thinks or so on. So, and I think, I mean, I'm an art director before I took on this role as a CEO, and I think that that's the biggest pleasure, working with people with different experience, combining teams with older age, younger, and when you find an equal way of working, it's like, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. I completely agree. I mean, I think, we talk about high on content, low on ego, right? So it's not about, you've got to bring the goods, you've got to have the content, you've got to, lean in. But more often than not, we are all around a whiteboard trying to figure it out together. And the energy is dictating the strength of the idea as opposed to a seniority or a discipline or anything like that. I think to your point, it's really dynamic to work in that way. It is, it's quite different though. We've had, and it's not easy for everybody. In fact, we've had people, especially in the creatives actually, because that's probably one of the biggest shifts, is that there isn't a preordained right to the idea by one particular discipline. And I've had people say it's like one of the most humbling experiences as a creatively awarded senior creative director, and then suddenly everyone's got a point of view on your work. But as long as the ambition is aligned, then you're doing it for the sake of the task and the brief.
I think, sorry, Scott, just to jump in on that. I think a big part of it that you're hearing from all of us is this idea of not protecting the culture and not, I think I've heard it and I hear it sometimes in our halls of like, oh, that's not the way we do it. And that usually makes me pause because there is no right way to do it. We're constantly learning. And so instead of protecting the culture, let's see where it takes us. We're all rooted in values that each of our organizations have, but open to the new energy that young people are bringing and have to be evolving and let our companies evolve with that while rooted in our values. I mean, I look at our company user guide and it's in a Google Doc because it should evolve and change. It's not this printed thing that can never change. There's some values that will never go away, like the learning orientation, collaboration, those things, but we have to look at it as evolutions of those concepts and not this set way of working all the time.
I think about the early days again, if a researcher had come in to try to inform one of the great creative minds within one of those agencies about some insights, and it literally get drop-kicked out of the room. You know, today, the most progressive, creative entrepreneurs covet that information. There's so much new knowledge that informs how to even go about the creative brief and execution on a particular campaign. All right, so you all have structural developments that make it easier for you to bring the culture that feels right. And you've made these investments in talent. So you've got two things going for you. But let's shift gears a little bit and talk about some of the macro issues that we're facing, not just in our industry, but in society as a whole. Diversity, inclusion, and equity, importantly, as I think a third component to that easy soundbite of diversity and inclusion. We think about equity on top of that, and that's not just equity of pay, but also equity of advancement and opportunity. These are the challenges that are facing not just our industry, but all of society. But we have an unusual megaphone, so that in the work that we do can not just be good for our clients, but can also inform society. I feel as if we have almost a bigger burden and opportunity. Evin, 72 and Sunny literally wrote the playbook on diversity and inclusion, and you offered it up almost in open source as a guidepost for others. Talk a little bit about some of the lessons learned and some of the plays.
Yeah, well, when we were working on our programs through the lens of our mission, we realized that, again, we were progress over perfection. We stood in front of the company and said, we're going to mess up. We want your feedback. We want to know what works, what isn't working, but we need to just start trying things. So there's a ton of different programs that we've done, many of which I've mentioned. But when we put out the playbook a year ago, we realized there's a conversation in our industry about this, and it had been happening for many years, but there wasn't a lot of action. And we were trying things, and so we wanted to help jumpstart that conversation and share it with anyone who wanted it, because this whole industry needs to evolve and change. We are prolific content creators. The amount of time it takes for a movie to be made, in 6 years for an animated movie sometimes, the amount of work we put out and can impact culture, we've got to make sure the people creating this reflect the cultures we're talking about. And so we realized this entire industry needs to change. So if our playbook can help trigger other people of easy ways in if you're a smaller agency and you're unsure of how to get started, hopefully that's a piece of it. Or we can learn. So we please ask for input. It's meant to be a part that's collaborative for the whole industry and beyond in terms of evolving change as we continue to grow. But there's things in there like the Gina Davis Institute and their GDIQ, which tracks how women and races show up and the roles they play in different media. There's internal programs and how we did it. You can literally find how do you do a high school internship. We have all the details. Take the templates, create your own presentation, put your own logo on it so that we can encourage more young people from diverse backgrounds to join this industry.
Anomaly talks about no silos, but very specifically the last silo in some of your more recent work.
Yeah, I mean, to echo a lot of what Evin said, obviously it's a significant issue. And I think the biggest thing is everybody recognizing the scale and the urgency of the issue and making therefore a big commitment. So one of the things that we did last year, which was just, as I mentioned, sort of looking at the industry landscape and looking what can be made better. And one of the things that we recognized was in the US, obviously the demographics are incredibly diverse now, and yet the landscape was still siloing something like a core competency of Hispanic marketing. So we brought Hispanic expertise and talent and just a wonderful team into the core proposition of the company to make us better, to make our clients better. And it's led to some great rewarding work that I think has really landed well in the culture of America. Johnny Walker, Keep Walking America would never have happened, of course, if we hadn't have made that commitment. But it's just the beginning, and everybody has to recognize that. We've kind of got to double down and make it a priority, obviously.
It is early days. Silla, you got a shout out. We'd have to like go to the videotape and slow it down. But I did hear Mark Pritchard say F&B when he was talking about the inflow and the outflow and the work that you did for SK2.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about a cultural change. I mean, it literally moved minds.
Yeah, I think that for us, coming from Sweden, I mean, Sweden is a quite far developed country when it comes to democracy and so on. And I think a lot of these values that actually our agency is based on come from the country where we are. And I think that make us quite well equipped, or what do you say, to bring these issues forward and to push borders. And I can see that the SK2 work we did with marriage market, that was coming from Sweden and having that perspective. We found this thing about unmarried women in China, and we thought it was really crazy that this was going on and no one was questioning it. And to us, that was kind of easy. Not easy to kind of convince the client at the first stage, of course, but to be brave to do this campaign about this. But when we let the campaign out, with the result were really speaking to itself, how engaging it is when brands dare to take these steps.
And so I think it's a little bit internally, it's about dropping the preciousness of the structures that existed before. It's about being thought leaders and bringing our clients along. And of course, as we heard in some of the earlier sessions, it does require this duopoly of collaboration and consensus. Clients are asking for, in some cases demanding, that we bring that cultural diversity to the table. And so I think that's a positive force forward. And of course, being big believers in maintaining the original entrepreneurial cultures of the members of our family, plays well into this new agenda for the 4As. We particularly endorse and support the new positioning and elevating culture up into those ranks. We believe that culture is something that is difficult to replicate, becomes a true competitive advantage. And we at MDC and all of our partners will continue to be thought leaders and demonstrate through our actions that we can be a force for change and good. Right on time. But before we end, I just want to say I am truly honored and blessed to consider these three terrific executives my colleagues, and their agencies our partners. And we hope we've given you some food for thought this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.